Hello everyone, Nathan P. Butler here, and this is mini Q&A number 21 for the channel. I am sitting this time because I'm trying to record this in a blitz with a whole bunch of other stuff so I can release it kind of bit by bit over the span of the next month or so. So this is mini Q&A number 21. We're using questions posted under Q&A number 20. I always try to grab the ones from the previous one to use for the next one. So if you want questions answered in number 22, make sure to ask questions in the comments here. I will not answer in the comments unless you tell me to go ahead and do so. Otherwise, I will keep them for possible questions for the next of the mini Q&As. I would also note that this is not the place for Star Wars home video questions. There is a separate series of Q&As from the Star Wars home video library. Ask your questions there. Episode number 14 of those Q&As should be being released right around the same time that this one is, wearing the same shirt if you're looking for it through like a thumbnail or something. So we have 3 questions this time that come in for the mini Q&A for us to hit, and then we will head on out of here, trying to hit these sort of, again, kind of rapid fire to give you guys answers to what you are curious about. And again, we do not have names showing up anymore in YouTube when you pull up the comments. Instead, it is usernames. So, username, the Sony Wonder Happy Madison fan asks, are you ever going to do a video on the home media of Willow? Actually, yes. I don't know when. But in my collection, it's kind of covered up, so I can't even see it from here. There's some boards in the way to protect stuff from my son getting into it. But I do have a fair amount of Willow home video stuff. I don't think it's necessarily all of it, but I've got quite a few that I added to my collection because I see it as sort of a spin-off of the Star Wars collection. Not because it's Lucasfilm, because in that case, you know, Indiana Jones would count. But because in canon, well, what used to be canon, in the official continuity, there was a point at which, as an April Fool's Day joke, they basically did a thing with the Star Wars website's databank where all the Willow characters from the film and on through the 3 novels by Lucas and Claremont that came later that are now non-canon thanks to the TV series, all that backstory was turned into a Star Wars universe thing. Like the planet they're on became a planet in the Star Wars universe. The magic was the Force and all that, which I thought was pretty cool. So over the years, I've grabbed Willow to include in the collection. I don't try to hunt down every single one, but I've got quite a few. I've got some VHS, Beta, Laserdisc, DVD, Blu-ray, and so on for Willow. I'll pick up the series if they ever put out a series set. It's a Disney Plus series, so chances are that's not going to freaking happen. I know you can make the argument, well, wait a second. That was an April Fool's Day joke, so it was in continuity, but not really. It's actually out. So since there's also those stories that connect with Indiana Jones, you should collect Indiana Jones 2. I simply choose not to. But the reason why I originally started including Willow was that because I thought it was so fun at the time. And I definitely enjoy the Willow series and original film. And there's just not a lot to collect for. With Indiana Jones, there'd be a lot more to collect than something like Willow. So yeah, probably eventually, I'm guessing it'll be like one intermission, maybe a couple intermission episodes from the Star Wars home video library to cover it as sort of an offshoot. But I haven't decided yet how I will cover it. It may just be like a separate little standalone video of its own or something. But yes, I do have some of those, and eventually I will be covering it. At least the ones that I've got. Then a question here comes from Brian Sales, 1615, who asks, I have a question that can be answered in the comments and doesn't need to wait for the next video. And then I didn't think to answer it in the comments, so it's here in the video. Last summer, I was doing a Google search for something completely unrelated to Star Wars, but it led me to show notes for an episode of Chrono Radio from 2003. Are the episodes of that podcast available for download anywhere in case I wanted to listen to one? So the answer to that is no. I have made the conscious decision now that StarWarsFanWorks.com as a repository, as like a hub for Star Wars fan audio as a community, and eventually just as a repository primarily for my stuff and some stuff I hosted for others, has gone away, and StarWarsFanWorks.com, NathanPButler.com, and AsagonHomeVideo.com all now just lead to my own website, which is primarily about the stuff that I've written, a place to host the Star Wars Timeline Gold's last edition, and a place to kind of, post some resources from time to time. That now that they're down from that process and the site changing, I'm not going to post them elsewhere at this one or make them available elsewhere. And part of that is just, that's a lot of stuff to put out and manage. I mean, I did podcasting for 18 years, so that's lots of stuff, right? That's Chrono Radio, Fan Audio Made Easy, the Butlerniverse, the EU Review, Star Wars Beyond the Films, and so on and so on. That's a lot of stuff to try to archive somewhere. I also tend to think that podcasts are often a product of their time, and internet culture is such that, you know, what might have been appropriate for a discussion years ago might not be appropriate now, but more often than not, it's more a matter of people these days not being able to understand that when something was made, it was a product of its time, in the sense that, you know, if there's an episode talking about how, well, there's not going to be any sequel trilogy according to Lucas, you're going to have somebody online who's like, no, there is one. See, it came out a few years later. You're wrong. Even though it was done a decade before they ever announced such a thing. There are way too many, for lack of a better term, intellectually dishonest idiots online to make it worthwhile to really put it somewhere like that. Though I have considered, I don't know if I'm going to do it, but I have considered actually going through and starting to go back and slowly re-listen to some of my older stuff. Maybe update, edit, or like grab like my favorite chunks or something and put them on the YouTube channel as stuff to be listened to, where it's just like the best of the podcast years or something for me. I don't know if I'm going to do it, but I have considered it, but it's going to require quite a bit of work in terms of listening, editing, finding like the segments that I want, cleaning up the hissing sound in the background and stuff like that, which might make it more work than it really needs to be. So no, at this point, none of my previous stuff, unless it was hosted by someone else, like Star Wars Beyond the Films, I think all those are still available through StarWarsReport.com. I don't think any of the other stuff is. Republic Forces Radio Network may still be available through RepublicForces.com, but for the vast majority of my early stuff, it is not available. The audio dramas that I did, those are still available, but that's because somebody has sort of taken on the legacy of StarWarsFanWorks.com and created a new sort of hosting site for Star Wars audio dramas, and that is Joe Harrison over at StarKillerSound.com. So like if you want to listen to Second Strike or Anthology or Always in Motion, Ambush on Ankara or whatever, they should still be over there at StarKillerSound.com, but any of the podcasts will not be. And then finally, oddly on a similar note, we have from Christopher Nelson, 1976, the rundown of your previous podcasting was fascinating and invaluable from the perspective of understanding the history of the fandom. Have you ever considered doing a video or video series about the history of fandom from your perspective? Either way, I've been a long-time, decades-long listener, long-time lurker, and all those previous podcasts were as important to my fandom as the films, books, comics, and games themselves. Thank you for your contributions. First off, thank you very much for that. It gladdens me. It's good to know that some of the stuff that I did over the years helped bolster others' fandom, helped kind of keep them connected. I remember when I started podcasting, there really wasn't a Star Wars podcasting community. The word podcast didn't exist yet. We called it internet radio at the time. And, you know, if you had 100 listeners, that was amazing back then. And it just kind of slowly grew. We were able to sort of form those connections. I kind of feel like that's kind of what I try to do with From the Star Wars Home Video Library, sort of have that community building from a Star Wars home video collecting standpoint. And, you know, we have that group that Justin Berger runs over on Facebook. Yeah, I think that a lot of times, I think that's part of why Lucasfilm is smart compared to some other companies when it comes to things like fan audio stuff, podcasts, and whatnot, in the sense that even when there is things that aren't legal, like fan fiction, technically, they're willing to say, you know what, do your own thing, because we know that it helps build the community, sustains the community, and it's an expression of and a means of sustaining love for our franchise, which helps us in our bottom line eventually, right, from a business standpoint, that it makes sense not to squash the little fans doing their thing, as opposed to some companies that have certainly tried to do so. So I'm glad that they see it that way so that this type of effect can still be had out here. As to doing a history of fandom from my perspective, that I don't expect to do, but this has come up a few times lately. I actually have an interview coming up. It hasn't been recorded yet, but on Mother's Day, actually, I'm going to be recording an interview for a YouTube channel that is supposed to be talking about, you know, just my experiences within fandom, some of the fandom background and whatnot. Basically, I got mentioned, I guess, a couple of times by people that this person had interviewed before, and they were like, hey, I'm going to try to interview him too, to talk about stuff. It's kind of a general laid-back Star Wars conversation. That should be being recorded in mid-May and released, I guess, shortly thereafter. But it's had a chance to kind of consider back to my old projects, and I've created, for my own use, sort of an Excel spreadsheet of all the different projects I've been involved with, all the different, you know, lines of videos even, for instance, or podcasts or whatever, and basically made a little timeline thing out of it so I can visually see my own projects. I don't think I have it on the Mac right now, but it's got me sort of thinking maybe it'd be interesting to do, like, for the vlog that I've barely done anything with in a few years, to bring back, you know, the voice of reason or lack thereof vlog, and maybe do kind of like a reminiscing, like a looking back, like, you know, a rapid fire, like these are all these podcasts I was involved in. Here's my thoughts on having been involved in these. Here's what I think about it looking back on it. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words here. Similar with like video series, just kind of like a retrospective, because really for me, you know, it's been a very long time of being involved in fandom projects, right? The Star Wars Timeline Gold was first released publicly in mid to late 97, basically. And that means it's been a very long time, been decades. And while I am basically retiring and stepping back from a lot of stuff, maybe that is the perfect opportune time to actually have a conversation or a sort of wax nostalgic about some of those things. So for fandom in general, I doubt it. Maybe for those sorts of things, if I get the time, maybe. It's definitely something that's been sticking in my mind a lot more lately, to actually go back and sort of consider those things and discuss those things, particularly because I know that there are a lot of folks who follow the channel who they've been following my stuff for many, many years. And just because the channel only really got ramping up, you know, around what, 2011, 2012-ish, somewhere around, I don't know, just very early on, compared to now, the fandom projects that I was involved with go back much, much further. And so does the interaction with a lot of those folks. So it is very possible of some kind of looking back on my stuff at least, but fandom as a whole, probably not. Though, of course, I'm sure that if I'm talking about my projects of a given time period, talking about stuff related to the time period and what was going on in fandom at the time, probably would be inescapable, at least to some small degree. So with that, we will wrap up this mini Q&A. Those are all the questions for this time around. Again, if you have questions for the next one, drop them in the comments under this one, and I will grab some of those or all of those to use next time around. Can't say when, but I try to do these at regular intervals so that they can be done fairly quickly, just like this one. Thank you all for watching. Thank you for your questions for those who asked, and I will catch you in the next mini Q&A.